Hey guys, Shelter here. Now in this video, I'm basically going to be doing what I said in my last video, which was the bad weapons video. But I came up with an idea mid-video of basically ranking every faction from level 1 to 10. So basically, looking at their very early levels, I'm going to use Normandy for example, so the level 1 to 10 unlocks for each campaign. Basically saying which faction has the easier side, which faction has the harder sides. Now, obviously, of course, I will be comparing them in two regards, in how good they are with, against the side they're up against, and how good they are in custom. So, yeah. Now, I will be excluding gold orders, I will be excluding all of this, because let's face it, you can get some factions, you can get stuff like Panthers early, you can get, for example, in Moscow, you can get the T50 incredibly early if you buy into that. Whereas in something like, say, Tunisia, you its gold orders are all, apart from this one, and apart from that, this one and this one, they're all different in levels. So basically, yeah, I'm looking at pretty much everything, the strengths, the weaknesses. I'll put like a small annotation at the end of each one saying what's the strength, what's the weakness of each, of each faction, and basically just rank them from worst to best. But, just, or weakest to strongest would probably be the better term, actually. Anyways, let us start with what I think is the weakest, very early game faction. So, again, level 1 to 10. What I think is the weakest, and let's continue going over to the strongest. Coming in without question as the weakest has got to be Berlin's Axis. Now, the problem with Berlin Axis is, Berlin Axis is a campaign of two extremes. In the early game, in the late game I should say, they are fucking powerful. MP43, FG42s, and, MG34 with the drum, okay? Very powerful. But in the early game, they struggle a lot. And you just have to look at their unlocks to see this. I mean, their first good weapon is level 7. Like, you don't get... look at all of what they get. They get the Kar98K with the scope, Kar98K, Drellin, G6, Faust, and that's it. Right? Now, the Faust is great, but don't get me wrong, I love the Faust, it's great. But it's not a weapon you want to see. Like, it's not the, a good, you're using this from beginning to end weapon. And if you look at the, these are glitched again. But, you get the 3008, and eventually you get the MP40 at, like, level 8, which, yeah, the MP40 is great, but it's not worth, grinding. I mean, it's basically, you get the MP40 for, like, the 5th time, and let's face it, it's not as good as what the Allies have, and, if you're being carried on the back of 3 weapons, there's only really 3 weapons in the early game that are good, which are the Gevir 43, the MG34, and the MP40. And I would argue, yeah, the MG34 is a 10 out of 10 weapon, the Gevir 43 is a 9 out of 10 weapon, and the MP40 is a 7-8 weapon. But the problem is that you look at the other factions, and they've got equally as good stuff, if not better, and they've got some other things as well up their sleeve. Now, what do they have in terms of aircraft? Well, they have a BF-109, which are actually not that good. Like, I don't like BF-109s that much, and I'm pretty sure any pilot who's used these can say as well. They're not the best thing. They're not good for dogfighting, and they're just not good. They get the Stuka, which is, it's a Stuka in Berlin. Like, the Stuka's great for, just bombing stuff up, and I do love the Stuka, but the problem is that Berlin's not the easiest campaign to get Stuka runs on. And in terms of vehicles, they get the J. All they have is the J for the early game, and the J, it's a good tank, but it's not good in Berlin. Like, in Normandy, this is a good tank. I put it at number 6 on my list, so basically near enough dead middle. a dead middle of the road tank. But in Berlin, this is last, dead last, worse than even than anything the Soviets have. There's a reason why I've actually got the premium Panther, because, well, A, it's a Panther, and Panthers are great, and B, the J is just so underpowered in Berlin that it's not worth getting anything other than the Panther. Maybe the Jag... Oh, and the Jag. The Jag's pretty good if you have this. This is really good, but I don't use it because I use the Panther G a lot. But yeah, not really... So basically, they've got good stuff, but the thing is, they're outclassed by most other factions in the early game. Anyways, let's move on to number 9. Coming in at number 9 is actually, surprisingly, the Soviets in Moscow. Now, I will say again, like I said, the Soviets in Moscow are a very late game faction. You get the PPD and the PPSH. And you get this PPD here. Now, you might be saying, but what about this PPD? It's level 11. And I'm going to judge it from the first 10 level. Because if that's the case, we're going to have to throw the level 11 weapons in for other factions. And some factions get much better with their level 11 weapons. Such as Normandy Allies. Because they get a good LMG at that point. And some factions even get worse because of their level 11 weapons. So, yeah. Anyways, in terms of... if you look in the campaign... well, there's not really much to say about Moscow because the Moscow weapons are all pretty balanced, actually. But that's the problem. They're just balanced. There's nothing, amazing here that stands out as an amazing weapon. They're all just good. Obviously, you have the PPD, which is pretty good. You've got the... What else do you have? You have the PTRS, or PTRD. You also get the Madden, which is not the best LMG. It's an okay LMG, but it's not the best. And yeah, that's about it really. You get a biplane. You also get the flying brick here. You get this flying brick. Which, I mean, the IL-2, it's fine. It's got rockets and bombs, so it's pretty good. I mean, rockets and bombs in this game are just disgusting. If you use them correctly. And an IL-2 can be disgusting when you use it correctly. But the problem is, I don't really see the tanks really being that good. You've got the T-26, which is a T-26. And you also get the T-60, I believe. Yeah, the T-60, which I really do not like the T-60 at all. It's a far cry to the stuff that you get much later, like the T-50 and the BT and the Bias Tank 7. That joke's never going to get old. Yeah, so again, the only reason they're higher than the Axis in Berlin is because they've got consistently good weapons, whereas the Axis in Berlin they get no good weapons until level 7, whereas the Soviets, they get the PPD really early. They also get like the Mosin Dragoon, which is alright, and then they get stuff like the Carbide, which is decent. And the Madden, which is okay. I mean, not many bad stuff in the Moscow campaign, to be honest. Anyway, let's move on to number 7. Coming in at number 8, I know I accidentally said number 7 just then, it's actually number 8, is actually the other side of Moscow, Axis Moscow. I said Berlin Moscow for some stupid reason. It's early morning. So, what do these guys have which is better than them? Well, in my opinion, they just get a better tank, the Panzer IIIB. They also get the Stuka, which is pretty cool. And they get the MG13. So, they get some really good stuff later. And on top of that, you might be thinking, but you criticised Berlin Axis for being top-heavy at the end of theirs. Well, here's the thing. They get good weapons as well. Like, they get the MP34 here, they get they get a pre-war car, which is alright, I guess. But you can see here, like, they get mostly good stuff until level 10. And even at, you get, like, the MP38, which is fine, I guess. You also get stuff like the MG13 is a really good LMG. It's one of the best. I've picked up a few times. It's really good. And, yes, I mean, there's not much to say, really. I mean, you've got some pretty strong... You know, you've got some strong things, but it's just not... You know, it's not as good as other campaigns as well. There's no... You know, these are all... They're all fine. It's kind of like the Allies. They're all fine. It's not... Like, it's basically just a constant progressional curve up. It does... I would say the only reason it has the boost over the Allies is the MG13. If the MG13 was like level 11 or something, or level 13, then maybe I could understand, you know, maybe putting the Allies above it, but I think because the MG13 is slightly lower in this campaign, I think it just is more deserving of the spot. You know, it's more deserving of being number... being number 8 than the over the Allies. Anyways, let's move on to number 7 for real this time. Coming in at number 7 now, this will be a humongous shock to most people involved. It's actually the faction I think is the weakest, which is Axis Tunisia. Now, Axis Tunisia is, honestly, again, like I said, it's quite a weak faction. It is probably the weakest faction in the game. However, they do have some very good early game surprises that takes people by surprise. First off, the Kakano Model 38 with the 7.35 rounds. Fucking hell, these are good rifles. Like, these are actually underrated bolt actions. I wouldn't say these are the best bolt actions in the game, but they're good, and you get them at level 4. Second thing, the Beretta M1. What another great SMG. The only real downside is that they get this hunk of junk, and they have to basically the same as the Axis in Normandy. They got to struggle with this. They also get a pretty bad armored car right at the beginning, and you know you have to wait until level 6 until you actually get an actual tank. But other than that, they've got decent. This is a decent plane from what I've heard. And again, other than the Brado, it's all really solid unlocks. You also get a pretty good early game bolt action that does quite decent damage, and you also get stuff like the car. You know the Carcano. Obviously, you get the car, which is fine. You get the MP28, which, I mean, you're gonna throw it out for the Beretta M1 quite quickly. Which, I mean, the Beretta M1 is really good. Like, I think I haven't said it enough. It's a very good SMG. Honestly, this campaign is really just getting carried by the Beretta M1 and the Carcano with the 7.35mm. Other than that, it's just fun. You know, it's average at best. I mean, the only real downside is that you get the Brado really late, and you have to wait until level 6 until you get an actual tank. Because let's face it, this tank is subpar at best. This one's alright. I mean, I saw my, I know Tony once actually did this, where we were playing a custom match, and I think he went the whole game in one of, actually no, he went most of the game until he ran into a Tiger in one of these on Bello, and it was a lot of fun. Just literally just flanking around him in the and using him as cover. That was a fun game. But yeah, great. Honestly, okay faction actually for the early game. The only problem is they just the reason why I say they're the weakest is because they just don't get the really good. By the time they get their good weapons, every other faction has much better weapons, and they don't have any big standouts. But in the early game, they've actually got some good surprises up their sleeve. So yeah. Don't judge everything by its cover, by it being the weakest faction, because they can just spring some surprises every now and again. Anyways, let's move on to number 6. Coming in at number 6 is actually the Allies in Normandy. Now, I need to explain why. The main reason is they do not get a good close range option until level 22. Especially, they don't get a good SMG until level 22. They don't get a good close range option until level 19. Like, so immediately you're going to be playing very long range with these. Now, some factions excel at long range, but like basically everything in Moscow and Tunisia. However, unlike Moscow and Tunisia, which actually also have some good, decent close range options, like the MP 34, like the MP 38, oh, 34, the MP 38, and the whatever it is, the PPD in Moscow, and the Beretta M1 and some other SMGs I'll talk about later in Tunisia. The Allies don't get a good SMG until level 22, so immediately they're out on the race on the back foot. What else do they have? Well, looking at the campaign tree, they don't actually have... It's kind of the similar thing to Berlin, only it's a lot more exaggerated, and their stuff comes a lot more early. They get the best bolt action in the game, hands down, with the number 4 right off the bat. They get a really good fighter here with the P-38, which is basically the perfect noob vehicle. This thing is the perfect noob vehicle because these M8 rockets just obliterate anything that comes near it, so it's just, they're annoying to come up against. They also get the M1 Grand, and then they get the Piat. So, yeah, I mean, obviously I didn't say anything about the Panzerfaust, but they get some good weapons early on, and then they get the Scott, which is very, very skill oriented, so not really a strength there. The Grand, though, they get the Grand, which is really good. I think everyone loves the Grand, so that's the thing, like, with Berlin, it was all at the top, right? It was all, level 7, level 8, level 9, level 10, stuff like that. That's when they got their good stuff. Whereas with the Allies, it's scattered, so, you get the best bolt action level 3, you get their best fighter at level 4, you get their good their good semi-auto at level 7, you get this at level 5, which, honestly... The Carbine, it's a bad it's a bad semi-auto. It's one of the worst semi-autos in the game. However, it gives you a decent early game advantage if, if you get a couple of these before the car. It used to be much easier back in the day when you basically just rolled bronze order boxes to get them. But the Grand, obviously is a much better rifle than the Carbine. So yeah, and I know I was shitting on them quite a bit, and I put them as like 9th and 10th, but the Scott and the Stuart, they can be decent at times, especially in the hands of a good player. Especially the Scott. The Scott in the hands of a great player is very good and could easily catapult this faction, quite higher. But I'm judging this based on an average noob player, so yeah, I would say middle of the pack. Really, they've got great stuff, but it's filled in with a lot of weaknesses, such as, no good close-range options until much later. Anyways, let us move on to number 5. Coming in at number 5 is actually Tunisia Allies. Now, the reason Tunisia Allies gets a little bit higher than Normandy Allies is they just get, with their stuff, they get some of the similar stuff to Normandy Allies. However, they just get more consistently good stuff. Like, look at this. Sten. Hurricane. Mark III. You get the Mark III. You get the Boys. You get the Lanchester. You get the number 4. You also get an LMG at level 10, which isn't the best LMG, but hey, it's a lot better than the Braiders, so... Yeah, they just get a lot of good stuff. Now, they get a lot of average stuff, actually, I'd say. Like, average to good. Like, I mean, they get the number 3, which is a pretty decent bolt action. They get the number 4, which is a really good bolt action. Actually, I wouldn't say the number 3 is a bad bolt action. It's actually pretty good. They get the Lanchester, which is a very good SMG. You get the Vickers, which is okay, I guess. And they get the Hurricane, which, it's a Hurricane. You can't go wrong with a Hurricane. In terms of armour, though, that's the problem. The only problem is their armour. The Damir's not that good. Okay, this thing is not that good. And the A13's alright, but the Damir's not good. I've used this thing, it's not that good. And obviously, I'm not including the Charlton squad, because if I include the Charlton squad, then they would be number one. They would be close to number one, actually, because the Charlton squad is so powerful. But I'm not including these the Charlton squad. The same goes with Soviet Berlin. I won't be including the Battle Summer squad because not everyone has that. I'm pretty sure I specified it when I was talking about the Gold Orders and stuff like that. But yeah, pretty good faction overall, but just average. You know, it doesn't have a good standout weapon, but what they do have is a lot of average weapons and above average weapons. Kind of like Moscow, but a lot more like, with Moscow, everything felt like, oh, great, it's not really an upgrade. Whereas this is like, oh, it's a number 3 or a number 4. They're upgrades. Or the Lanchester being an upgrade to the Sten. And even then they get a good SMG off the bat, so yeah. Anyways, let's move on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is actually Stalingrad Soviets. Now, the reason Stalingrad Soviets are at number 4 is mostly because of one thing. It's actually because of mainly one thing. Stalingrad bias. Basically, for the start, I'm going to exclude... I'm going to include the full access stuff here. So let's pretend these are all... You can unlock all of these off the bat. So we'll start with that. We'll start with that. We'll look at the good stuff. PPD with the medic squad. Obviously, the medic squad is just overpowered as is. I mean, 5... You can get basically... It's basically a 5-man assaulter squad. You get the Winchester, which is a pretty good lever action, which is the only lever action, but it's a great lever action weapon, and one of the best weapons in the game for manual weapons. I would say the only thing better than it is the number 4, so it's a really good lever action weapon. I need to use it a lot more. You get the YAG, which, it's a YAG. This is the only downside, you get the Braider, but then you get the T-34, which obviously if you pay, and the SVT. And you also get the, this bomber, which is, I mean, it's a bomber, so you can't go wrong. You also get the PPRS as well. I thought it was the PPRD, but it's actually the PPRS. So you get a good, you get some decent stuff really early on, but the problem is, it's just, I mean, there's nothing stand out here. Obviously... But the main problem is Stalingrad bias, like I said. And that is mostly TNT charges. Because, if you don't know, Stalingrad has these things called TNT, as you can see. I've got these on quite a few of my soldiers. Both sides have these. They also have like another thing, like those buildable mortars, those glass mortars. And they also have bombing runs and stuff like that, which has to be taken into effect as well, unfortunately, because they are not the squad at level 9. Ugh. That is honestly cancer. But, yeah, the Soviets, they get a lot of really good early stuff as well. They get, like, TNT, which just destroys everything it comes into contact with. And you also have, like, you just get a lot of there's a lot of overpowered stuff in the early game, but their weapon, like, they're really getting carried by their equipment, really. Like, if it wasn't for the TNT pouch and the, the bombing ones and stuff like that, they would be a lot lower. They would be probably around, like, level 7 and something like that. But in fact, they would probably even be lower than Soviet Moscow. They would be lower than Soviet Moscow. Actually, maybe not. Maybe the T-34 just carries it, but they would be quite low. But just because of the Stalingrad bias, they are a lot higher. Anyways, let's move on to number 3. Coming in at number 3 is another Stalingrad bias. This time, one I've actually had the unpleasant experience of going up against. Yeah, it's Stalingrad Axis. The only reason being is that they actually get they get an actual LMG. That's the only reason they are higher, is that they get the MG13. Like, other than that, they're basically the exact same. Panzer IIIN is alright, I guess. It's a Panzer IIIN. Obviously a Stuka, obviously, which is pretty good. Gavir 41. I mean, they do get a BF-19, which is not the best. They get the medics, obviously the war crime squads. But the main thing, again, TNT charges, you know, obviously, you know, TNT charges, and mix it in with stuff like, you know, bombing runs and the glass mortars and other crap. Yeah, there's no reason. There's a reason why this faction is, in my opinion, the, you know, probably the most overpowered. You know, I think this is probably the most overpowered faction in the game at the moment, and there's no wonder that it's only at level 3. In fact, I would say if it wasn't for these overpowered features that they unlock almost immediately, both Stalingrad factions would be fighting at the top. They would be much lower than Tunisia, and they would be lower than Tunisia, and they would be probably fighting with Moscow. The only reason they're any higher is because they've got the TN. Is because they have the noob. They have literally these no skill weapons. They also have, you know, they literally have no skill multi kills, multiple of them, and it's not fun playing against. Honestly, it's not fun playing against Stalingrad in Stalingrad X, any Stalingrad faction really, in customs, and I know people who abuse them because they can't max a faction, and they literally bought Stalingrad. Anyways, let's move on to number 2. Coming in at number 2 is actually my favourite faction, which is Normandy for the Axis. Now, normally for the Axis, they get some pretty good stuff really early on. Obviously they get the Puma, which is a pretty good tank if you use it correctly. The ME410 is very good. Honestly, this is a very good starter plane. Gavir 43 and the MP40. I'm not going to talk about the Sturmpeter or the Panzer 3M because they're skill-based, again. And even the FNAB at times, you know, you can probably say it's decent. They also start with a very good starting SMG with the MP34, which is a really good starting SMG, actually. Like, I would say this thing, alongside the MP40, can carry you until the MP43. You can literally just use these two. If you don't want to invest in, like, MP35 or Berettas, just use the MP40 or the MP34. Like, of course, I get the Gavir, which is a very good rifle. The only thing they really lack is an LMG, but, again, like I said, with the earlier factions, if we included the LMGs, then these would be a lot lower because they get the Braider. But yeah. Other than that, they just get some good vehicles. Like, they get the Puma as well, which is pretty good. They get like I said, the BF-110, which is a very good starting vehicle, by the way. Like, I really like the BF-110. It's a very good starting vehicle, and it's actually decent for dogfighting. The only problem is it's really not the quickest. But yeah, it's a very good starting vehicle. And they get some pretty good, you know, they get some pretty good rifles as well. Like, the Maz is okay. The Manlik is okay. The car's really good. And of course, they get the Gavir 43, which is the Gavir 43. You can't go wrong with a Gavir 43. Anyways, let's move on to number 1, which is very obvious if you've seen my video, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know how obvious it is that this faction is going to be number 1. Coming in at number 1, without a shadow of a doubt, has to be Berlin Soviets. Now, I'm not even going to have to, I'm going to discount the PPK squad here, but why are they number 1? Well, first, I'm just going to point out this squad here. Can you notice something about this squad? Something which other squads don't have. I mean, I'm just going to show you a couple of my other squads, you know. Do you see this? This is actual armor. Now, the armor doesn't do too much. It protects you against 9mm weapons like MP40s and, you know, MP308s and stuff like that. It won't do much against rifles, but it actually does do a little bit of damage reduction alongside, you know, health. So the armor actually gives damage reduction. So against, you know, 9mm ammo, which is pretty good against stuff like, you know, MP40s and stuff like that. So immediately they have this, which no other faction has. And they get this on a few of their soldiers. Like, their soldiers get this, their flamethrowers can get this. Obviously, I'm not going to say it anymore, but what do they get in terms of rifles? Well, they get the Mosin carbines and stuff like this, which are pretty decent. Like, this Mosin carbine's actually not bad. They also get the SVT, which is an okay semi-auto. Not as good as something like the AVS or the AVT, which I'm going to unlock soon. Jesus Christ. But they also get the PPS 42 and 43, which are very good. Honestly, the fact that this is considered the worst Soviet SMG kind of shows. Because if this was in any other campaign, it would be a 9... This is a 9 out of 10 SMG. And it's the worst. And this is a, I would say this is another 9 out of 10 SMG. And it's one of the worst SMGs in the campaign. That just shows how good this campaign is. That these 9 out of 10 SMGs are the worst. They also get the DP27, which is a very, very solid LMG. And they get the SVT, which is pretty good. So, you might be thinking, okay, so they have great, infantry weapons. They must suffer in other aspects. Not at all. The fighter's pretty good. The fighter's actually pretty good. So they get a decent fighter. They also get an IL-2. This IL-2 is actually not too bad either. So they get... Basically, they get a pretty good fighter and a pretty decent bomber. A decent attack bomber. So they're great in the... So they're passable in the air and they're great on the ground. Surely their vehicles must be bad at that. Their tanks must be bad. Not at all. Their first vehicle is a T-34-85. This is their only unlock during this time. And it's a fucking 85mm T-34. Nothing... This thing can beat any Axis tank. The only thing I think it can actually... You can say, yeah, that tank beats it. Is the Tiger. Like, every Axis tank pales in comparison to this. So, really, this thing is a perfect faction. Like, every other faction, there was some weakness. Okay? There was some weakness to every faction. Berlin Soviets have no weakness. They have no early game weakness. They've got good bolt actions. A decent semi-auto. Fantastic, some of the best, probably the best starting SMG in the game. And a really good support SMG later on. They get a good machine gun. They get decent vehicles. And they get a really good tank. They get decent aircraft, and they get a really good tank off the bat. Compare this to Axis, who was, by the way, dead last. They get a good air. They get a very good bomber, but they get in this campaign subpar Panzer IV. Which again, this is why the Panzer IV is subpar in this campaign, because the T-34-85 blitzes this thing apart. And, they also get, good SMGs, but they're up against fantastic SMGs. Obviously, I have the PPD here, but they're up against PPS 42 and 43s, which, as you can see here, I've got quite a few of them. Some of them even decently leveled. And it's hard to say. They're just so powerful. Anyways, I'm going to end the video here. Hope you guys have enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think the Soviets are how overpowered the Soviets are? Let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video.